Captain Akros watched as the last of his crew trickled into the hangar, which had been the only room on his ship that had been big enough to comfortably hold his entire crew. Most of them looked either confused or annoyed, like they didn't understand why they had to be here, and Akros couldn't blame them for that. After all, meetings like this were usually something only the higher-ranking members of the crew, who would then pass on the important parts of the lower ranks, took part in, so it was understandable why they would question why they were here. And as for the other one, they were annoyed because they knew that they were here to listen to another lecture about the species they would soon meet, humanity, just like the ones they had to listen to for weeks now. Which Akros couldn't really blame them for either, since he had been just as sick of these lectures as they had been over the past few weeks. However, what his crew thought about the lecture or its necessity was unimportant, because the mission they had been given by the Hive Queen herself took priority. A mission that might now be in jeopardy because whoever had designed the lectures had overlooked something. Something he had discovered by pure chance while watching some old human movies, causing him to go down a rabbit hole deeper than he could have ever imagined. Only to emerge days later, knowledge in hand to enlighten his crew. So he waited until the last of his crew had sat down and then said, "Alright, I will keep short. It came to my attention that the lectures we all had to endure have overlooked something rather important. So can any of you tell me what this is?" Before pushing a button to make a picture of an animal appear on the holoscreen behind him. The animal belonged to the Canid family, though he doubted any of his crew knew that. Rather long gold-coloured fur, a big fluffy tail, short floppy ears, and holding what the humans called a tennis ball in its snot. None of his crew raised their antenna or said anything, clearly showing that they got no idea what that animal was called. So he said, "The humans call this animal a dog, but the species is also divided into dozens of breeds," before pushing the button again to change into one that showed different dog breeds. The reason for this variety is that this is one of the oldest species humans have domesticated, so they were bred to fulfill a number of purposes. Can one of you tell me one of them? This time some of his crew raised their antenna, but he only picked the one that would give him the answer he needed to make his point. That person was of course one of the ship's cooks, famous for only ever thinking about food, so his answer when Akros pointed at him was, of course, "Food." But Akros didn't even acknowledge that answer, instead pressing the button again so that the holoscreen played a video that he had chosen specifically to get his point across to even the dumbest of his crew. The video showed an insectoid alien the humans commonly referred to as a waspoid, because of their resemblance to a flying insect found in their homeworld, in what looked like someone's garden, holding up what was clearly a smaller breed of dog by the scruff of his neck. The dog was whimpering rather loudly, clearly aware of the fact that the waspoid's mandibles were aimed directly at his throat. But before the waspoid could sink its mandibles into the dog's throat, somebody yelled, "Hey! What the fuck are you doing with my dog?" So loudly that multiple members of the gathered crew flinched like they had been slapped out of shit surprise, much like the waspoid, and a moment later a rather angry-looking human male stomped into frame. He was barely tall enough to reach the waspoid's chest, yet he radiated an aura of danger so potent that it made the insectoid cower like he was in the presence of a monster, at least twice his size. Yet despite that, the waspoid managed to say, I was just looking for some food. Which only made the human even more angry and yell, "Then go to the bloody supermarket and buy yourself something to eat! Not try to eat my dog, because my dog is not food!" Making the waspoid flinch once more before he managed to say, I'm sorry. I clearly did something wrong, but please calm down." This, of course, didn't calm down the human at all. It just annoyed him. So instead of calming down, he yelled once more, "Just put my dog down already!" But even though the waspoid was clearly scared shitless at this point, he didn't do what the human told him. Instead, he said, "Only when you have calmed down," making multiple members of the crew do their species equivalent of face-palming, and Akros couldn't really blame them, because the waspoid had now turned this into essentially a hostage situation. However, the human didn't react to this situation the way the crew had clearly expected. They had expected him to shout again. Instead, he said, "Put the dog down," as he walked towards the insectoid with so much cold malice in his voice that Akros couldn't help but feel like the temperature in the hangar had decreased by a few degrees. Which the waspoid seemed to have felt as well, making him realize what a big mistake he had made and causing him to apologize feverishly, yet still didn't release the dog. This, of course, made the human yell, "Let go of him already, you fucking bug!" before he tried to shove the waspoid off his feet in an attempt to get him to drop the dog. However, the human had vastly overestimated the insectoid's durability, causing him to put way too much of his considerable strength into the shove. In fact, more than enough to pierce the waspoid's exoskeleton and run the insectoid through with his bare hand. For a moment, both the waspoid and the human just stared at the arm poking out of the insectoid's chest, before the human realized what he had done and quickly pulled his arm free, causing the waspoid to fall forward to the ground, finally releasing the dog. The dog quickly ran to its owner, who just stood there for another moment, before he said, "Fuck." The video ended after that, leaving the entire crew gawking at the screen in utter shock at the violent turn of events. But before any of them had even a chance to digest what they had seen, Acros played the next video. This time, the video showed a group of mammalian aliens that looked like a cross between what the humans called a rabbit and a rat, the humans just called rodents, carrying what was clearly an older human slug rifle towards the door of a HAB unit, while two of them walked next to them, seemingly overseeing the transport. One of them turned towards the camera and said, "Is the camera recording? Rolling?" making the camera view shift as whoever wore it turned towards the speaker and said, "Yes, sire, my lord, it is, yes, yes." The rodent in charge that had spoken seemed pleased by this, though he still said, "Make sure it remains that way. The Warren Lord made it very clear that he wished to see the death demise of the beast monster, so he does not tolerate negligence failure. Yes, yes." The camera rodent just nodded in response, making the camera wobble a bit in the process, and then just continued on towards the door. When they reached it, the lead rodent called the procession to a halt and then addressed all of them. "Remember, the beast monster inside is truly mighty powerful and clever cunning, yes, yes. So be prepared, ready for anything and everything, understood?" The rest of the rodents gave him a quick, "Yes, sire, my lord," in response, which seemed to please the lead rodent. Then the four rodents carrying the gun turned the firearm so that its grip and magazine were pointed to the floor. Two of them held it on either side of the magazine after putting on some ear protection, while another one slung his arms around the grip so he could press the trigger, and the camera rodent held the stock. It looked utterly ridiculous, causing some of the crew to snicker, or at least as close as their species could come to snickering at the sight. Anyways, once they all got a good grip on the weapon, they all nodded towards their leader to signal that they were ready. The leader then turned towards the last three rodents in front of the door. Two of them held weapons way more appropriately sized for them, while another was tapping away at a datapad, and after another moment, the one with the datapad nodded as well, signaling that he too was ready. Then the lead rodent raised 3 of his 4 fingers and began to count down with them. When he reached 0, the rodent with the datapad pressed a button to open the door, and then the rest of them piled into the room. The inside of the room was pitch black, so the 2 rodents with the rifles activated the flashlights mounted to the underside of the barrels of their firearms, and then scanned the room, illuminating the rather Spartan interior, made up of a table, some chairs, and a sofa. There was a hallmark of HAB units like this for a short moment. But soon the sound of something jumping off the sofa drew all their attention towards it, before anyone could see more of the unit's interior. And soon a somewhat fat dog of the same breed Acros had shown first walked around the sofa, his eyes reflecting on the light, making it look like they were glowing, though Acros couldn't tell which colour. The dog didn't show any signs of aggression, like barking or growling. It simply stood there, his tail wagging, and what the humans often saw as a big smile on its face while looking straight at the rodents. Yet despite that, as soon as it had fully emerged from behind the sofa and stopped moving, the lead rodent yelled, "Fire!" causing all the rodents with weapons to open fire. The small rifles were pretty much useless, their laser bolts too low power to pierce the dog's hide. However, the human slug rifle tore through the poor animal with ease, killing it with a few rounds to the chest. But the rodent kept firing even when the dog fell over, until the gun was empty, and then they slowly advanced towards the now rather ravished corpse of the dog. However, before they could even take more than a few steps towards it, another door opened, surprising them so much that the 2 rifle-bearing rodents fired off a few bolts towards the giant shadow, standing in the doorframe. The bolts, of course, didn't manage to harm the shadow in any way, but caused him to say, "Lights on," causing the lights in the HAB unit to come to life, revealing the shadow to be, rather unsurprisingly, a human. Said human just kind of stared at the young group of rodents before him for a brief moment before he said, "What are you doing?" But stopped when his eyes found the corpse of the dog, his mouth falling open in shock, seemingly unable to believe what he was seeing for a moment. Then he began to walk towards it. The lead rodent, however, seemed to see this as a sign of awe at what they had done, so he said, "That is right, correct, man-thing. We killed the beast monster that has somehow managed to get into your warren. No need to thank us, yes? Which caused the human to stop, and slowly turn his head towards the rodents. Now, the humans often like to say that the eyes of someone were a window into their soul. Something that Akros had thought was utter nonsense, until he had seen this video, because as soon as the human was looking in the direction of the camera, he, and the crew, could see the undiluted rage burning in his eyes, to the point that at first Akros could have sworn his eyes were softly glowing. Something his crew was seemingly seeing right now as well, as they shrunk under his gaze and tried not to soil themselves, just like the rodents. Yet none dared to move or even look away, frozen in place by the painful death the eyes silently promised. But then the human took a step towards the rodents, causing the one that was still gripping the trigger of the human gun to pull it without thinking. But all that did was make a rather audible click echo through the unit, and tell the human that the only weapon that could kill him was out of ammo. So he charged them, roaring as he did, the sound so guttural and bestial that Akros at first just couldn't believe a human throat could make such a sound. The rodents reacted to the clearly angry human charging them the way you would expect them to. They ran as fast as they could towards the door. But some didn't, though which of the rodents exactly no one could say, because the camera rodent was running towards the door. Though judging by the still audible clicking and the red flashes of light, Akros would say it was the two with rifles and the one that had pulled the trigger of the human gun. Which was partly proven when the body of one of the rifles rodents flew past the camera rodent and straight into one of the other rodents that had carried the human gun so hard that Akros wouldn't be surprised if the mammal had died on impact. That it sent the other rodent flying as well for a bit, before both hit the floor hard, causing them to roll across the floor for quite a bit. If they were dead, however, none could tell, because the camera rodent just ran past them without even glancing at them, and even when he did look back, none could see the two rodents, because the camera rodent was far more focused on the human that was currently stomping down at the rodent that had held the gun trigger, with such force that he crushed the rodent's head as well as his torso, before charging after the rest, another blood-curdling roar on his lips. And thanks to his long limbs, he was gaining on them rather quickly, causing the rodents to run as fast as they could towards the door. Yet despite their efforts, the human managed to catch up to them, just before they reached the door and stomped down on the second of the gun carrier rodents, crushing him as well. But that gave the lead rodent enough time to get out of the hab unit and yell, "Hurry quickly, close the door gate!" causing the camera rodent to speed up even further, desperation pushing his body beyond its limits just enough to somehow get through the door. But as soon as he looked back, he saw that the reason why he got through the door before it had closed was that the human was holding it open. Just a bit at first, but after a mere moment, he pulled it open, wide enough for him to get out of his unit, and then raised his foot to stomp down on the datapad rodent, though none saw that happening, since the camera rodent had run away once more as soon as the human had raised his leg. Him and the lead rodent were now running towards a nearby elevator built for species their size, to get around easier, and to minimize the chances of getting underfoot of the larger species, as fast as they could, with the human in hot on their heels. More than once he got close enough to them to stomp down at them, in an attempt to crush them just like the rest, the rodents avoiding the attacks mostly by a hair's breadth, before the lead rodent managed to reach the elevator, and started to press a button over and over again to make the doors close, causing the camera rodent to speed up once more to get in. The doors closing right behind him, stopping the human from reaching inside with his hand. And like that, they managed to escape the human clutches. Yet despite that, neither of them seemed relieved and just stood there, breathing heavily for a few moments, until the camera rodent broke the silence. "What do we do now, sire, my lord?" The lead rodent pondered that question for a moment before he answered, "We have to get off ship vessel. The man-thing will not stop hunting us if we stay remain. I carry favour with Warren Lord, maybe enough to get us off the ship vessel. But we have to move fast quick if the man-thing gets to Warren. While we're still there, Clankin will hand us over to the man-thing and make it look like we have been acting on our own to avoid its wrath. If that happens, all we can do is run and hide until there is an opportunity for us to leave the ship vessel. So get ready to run and sprint as fast as you can. Yes, yes?" causing the camera rodent to nod his acknowledgement before both got ready to run towards their warren as fast as they could, as soon as the elevator doors opened. And that's exactly what they did, so Atcross just skipped ahead to the point where they reached their destination, because watching the two rodents travel through their ship for a few dozen minutes would have killed the tension and probably bored his crew half to death, both of which didn't serve his purposes. Anyways, eventually the rodents arrived at what seemed to be the door of a storage room, which someone had cut a hole out of to add a rodent-sized door with hinges to the bottom of it. Once at that rodent-sized door, the lead rodent knocked 2 times, then paused for a moment before knocking 3 times, causing the hatch that was set into the door to open, revealing unsurprisingly another rodent. This rodent, however, had a big scar over his left damaged eye, giving him a more menacing vibe than the other rodents so far. "Password?" he asked, with a monotone voice of someone that hated their job. "All praise the tiny hands that maintain the ship vessel we live on," the lead rodent answered, as soon as the question had left the scarred rodent's mouth, who just nodded in reply before he asked, "Where are the others?" "Dead. They died bravely valiantly fighting the beast monster. Now open the door. Warlord is awaiting our return, and you know how angry mad he gets when he is kept waiting." The scarred rodent just nodded at that again, before he closed the hatch and then opened the door. As soon as the door was opened, the 2 rodents ran through as quickly as they could into the room beyond, revealing an entire little town fashioned entirely out of scrap, old cargo crates and other boxes of every shape or size the rodents had managed to get their pawns on. It was a sight none of them had ever seen for themselves, despite them knowing that many ships kept a population of smaller sentient species because of how good they were at repairing ship systems no others could reach, and for pest control, since the smaller species often hid in the deepest bowels of their vessel to escape the notice of the other species on board. So the crew stared at the quite literally jury-rigged architecture like it was something out of a fairy tale, especially the building the rodents were heading towards. It was unsurprisingly the biggest of all the quote-unquote buildings, clearly intentionally built to resemble a human cathedral, clock tower and all, though far more gaudily decorated, probably just because the humans had in the past often revered to such buildings as the house of God, making the idea of living in a building like that rather appealing to the rodent elite, which were well known for their ego. However, the rodents never reached it, because word of their arrival and success had clearly been sent to the Warren Lord, so he decided to congratulate the returning heroes publicly, managing to intercept them around halfway to the building. This caused both of the rodents to bow before the lead rodent quickly said, "Lord Master, we have killed slain the beast monster like you have ordered, and now we humbly ask for the reward you have promised." Causing the Warren Lord to say, of course, I keep word promise. What do you want?" But before the lead rodent could answer, a loud bang echoed through the room, followed by the sound of creaking metal, causing all heads to turn towards the now slowly opening door of the storage room. Both of the rodents tried to make a run for it as soon as they saw the door opening, knowing full well what was doing that, but the guards of the Warren Lord seized them before they could get away. "What is the meaning of this? I thought you killed slain beast monster," the Warren Lord demanded angrily. But before the lead rodent could say anything, the door was yanked open wide enough for the human to squeeze through. Then he just stood there for a moment as he looked around the room, the crowbar he had used to force the door open still in his hand, until his eyes found the 2 rodents and the Warren Lord. This caused the 2 rodents to panic and try to run away again. However, even surprised, the Warren Lord's guards had too good of a hold on them for that to happen, and that reaction told the Warren Lord all he had to know. So he probably decided to throw the 2 rodents under the bus to save his own skin. But before he could even get out a greeting, the human said, "Why?" His voice barely more than a whisper. Yet every visible rodent, as well as the entirety of Acris's crew, heard it as easy as if he had shouted, causing them all to freeze up, because the sheer amount of pure, cold, murderous intent the human's voice had contained, while he stared at the Warren Lord, seemingly waiting for him to answer the question. Unsurprisingly, though, the Warren Lord only managed to stutter out, what? And other confused sounds, with a clearly furious human staring him down like that. So the human clarified, "Why did you send those 2 and the others? To kill my dog," gesturing to the camera and lead rodent as he did. This again unsurprisingly made the Warren Lord panic, causing him to say, No, I did not. But the human interrupted him before he could say any more than that. Don't tell me you are innocent, because it insults my intelligence and makes me very angry. Now why did you do it? His voice absolutely calm, yet everyone could practically feel the just, barely contained rage in every word he said, waiting for the slightest excuse to be unleashed. Then he continued to stare down the Warren Lord, waiting for him to answer the question, and in turn making it rather clear to the Warren Lord what kind of situation he was in, leaving the rodent pretty much cornered like a well rat. So, with Death quite literally staring him down, the Warren Lord pulls something out of one of his pockets and threw it at the human's face. It of course never hit the human's face, instead exploding with a bright flash of light in midair, and as soon as it had, the Warren Lord did the same thing the other two rodents had tried to do as soon as they saw the human. He tried to run away. But his flashbang was barely powerful enough to blind the front row of Acris's crew, and soon at this point, rather familiar foot stomped down at the Warren Lord, barely missing him, sending him tumbling across the floor for a bit. And once he came to a stop, the straight end of the crowbar came down on his neck, beheading the rodent, and burying itself in the ship floor. That finally got the guards moving again, though not in any unified manner. Most of them opened fire at the human, while the others ran for their lives. The human ignored the last fire, as he pulled his crowbar out of the floor, before he stood back up and then swung it in a low arc at the guards, sending 3 of them flying, their bodies as well as some of their limbs bent at unnatural angles. But that was once more all of the action they saw, because the camera rodent took that as a signal to leave and ran towards the back of the storage room, the lead rodent once more in front of him. However, only for a moment or two, before he was crushed by one of the smaller metal container box houses, causing the camera rodent to change course to avoid running into it, before he looked behind himself to see that, unsurprisingly, the human had thrown it and was now coming after him. So the camera rodent changed course towards the alleys and back alleys of the cargo box houses, in an attempt to slow down or make the human lose sight of his target for just long enough for the rodent to get away. Though with the camera on the rodent's head, and the human often smashing the cargo box houses aside to go after him, heedless of the destruction he left in his wake, that was rather hard. However, by some miracle, the rodent managed to escape the human's clutches long enough for him to reach the back of the storage room, where an opportunity to escape arose, in the form of an uninterrupted row of cargo box buildings that the rodent quickly ran behind, before stopping in the hope that the human would run past him, which he surprisingly did, giving the rodent an opening to run the way he had come, and quickly hide inside an unoccupied cargo box house. Once inside, he just stood there, leaning against the front door, breathing heavily for a moment or two. Then he began to hectically mumble to himself so fast that nobody could understand a word he was saying, but quickly stopped when he noticed the sound of breathing coming from somewhere to his left, and when he turned his head in that direction he saw one of the human's eyes looking directly at him through a window, causing the rodent to freeze up once more. Then the eye moved out of sight, and a moment later the cargo box house began to move, before tilting, causing the rodent to slide out of the door right into the palm of the human, his fingers immediately closing around the rodent. The rodent tried to break free with all his might, even biting the human to make him let go, but it was all useless, and soon the rodent found himself at eye level with the human. Both just stared at each other for a moment before the human once more asked, "Why?" Just like he had asked the Warren Lord. Though, unlike the Warren Lord, the camera rodent had an answer to that question.
Warren Lord ordered us to do it, yes.
But the human only asked, "Why?" again in response to that, causing the rodent to hesitate a moment before he said,
Our job role is to repair the systems of this ship vessel that others cannot reach, and to deal with animals, beasts that have gotten on board. But we did not know it belonged to you, yes, so please have mercy.
That answer only made the human even madder. His face twisted into a snarl, while the same undiluted rage as when the lead rodent had told him that they had killed his dog burned in his eyes, before he said, "So you didn't even check if she was dangerous or not, and just killed her?" He still didn't shout, but only barely, causing the camera rodent to stammer out some more pleas for mercy. But the human ignored them, and simply threw the rodent on the floor hard enough for the camera to fall off, landing a bit away from the rodent, his lens cracked. Meanwhile, the rodent was somehow still alive and trying to drag himself to safety. But he didn't get far before a pair of giant fists came down on him over and over and over and over again. Every impact breaking something, judging by the audible crack after every punch. But that soon transformed into a squelch, as the human rained blow after blow down at the rodent, turning him into a red paste. Yet despite that, the human just continued to rain down blow after blow, even though at this point he was just punching a red stain on the floor. This continued for several minutes until the human seemingly tired himself out and began sobbing. Then the perspective changed to the helmet cam of a member of ship security, standing in front of the human's hab unit with several others. All of them were armed to the teeth with likely the best weapons on the ship, as well as the best armor. Yet despite that, they were clearly on edge as they waited for one of them to open the door. But when they opened the door and piled into the room, all they found was a crying human sitting on the floor, hugging the mutilated corpse of his dog. Which is where the video ended, so Akros pressed the button again, making a mugshot of the human appear on the holoscreen, before he said, "His name was Frank Myers. Orphaned from birth and raised in one of the more unsavory sectors of human space, he had more than one reason to be angry at the universe. Yet despite that, he never was, and lived a happy, honest life, until his pregnant mate had an accident, killing their offspring before he could even be born. Which would have been bad enough, but the accident also left his partner unable to bear children, no matter what they tried, causing her to become quite depressed and to consider suicide more than once. But with the help of their loyal dog, Lucy, Frank managed to get her out of her depression and help her live again, until on their way to an orphanage they got into a car accident, which Frank's mate didn't survive. This sent Frank into a depression himself, with the only light in his life being his dog Lucy, that had become pregnant without him or his mate noticing. But he couldn't stay in the house he and his mate had bought together anymore, so he found a job on an alien ship, where only a week later his dog Lucy would be killed, as you just saw, and just a few days later he committed suicide. Now I am going to ask you all, even though I know the answer. After hearing all this, can any of you truly say they understand why this man did what he did? Everybody of the crew just shook their heads to answer their captain's question, so Akros continued. That is because humans are simply different from us, not just culturally but also biologically. A good example for that is names. We insectoids don't really use them because we are all born with a unique scent. But mammals like humans don't have a good enough sense of smell to do that, so they use names far more often than we do. Not to mention the fact that their colour vision is infinitely better than ours, so they quite literally see the world completely differently than us. But that of course goes both ways. For example, to the humans, we insectoid quite often act more like robots than beings of flesh and blood, because to them we appear rather emotionally stunted. Another big difference, that is more relevant to this discussion, is how they view family. For you see, to a human, even an animal can be part of their family. That is why many pet owners, especially dog owners, will react like this if their pets are threatened, because to them they are family, and humans will do quite a lot to save their families. Now with all that being said, I hope that it has slowly begun to sink into your heads what kind of species we are about to meet, which was something the lectures apparently didn't manage, so I will make this clear to all of you. We are about to meet the absolutely strangest and likely most powerful species in the entire known galaxy, whose ways are so foreign to us that they might as well be from another dimension. That could kill us as easily as one would crush a bug. We do that so that our people might thrive in this cruel and hostile universe. And no, I am not over-exaggerating. The outcome of this first meeting might very well determine the fate of our species. So I will not let you idiots ruin that just because one of you got hungry or something. Every little thing matters. That is exactly why I took on the name Akros, to try and bridge the gap. That means there is still a lot of work ahead of us before we will meet with the human delegation. The first of these lessons is this. Don't eat dogs. Has everybody gotten that into their heads? All crew members quickly nodded their understanding or gave other signs, causing Akros to nod, rather pleased by the results, before saying, Good. If you are hungry, just go to a supermarket and buy yourself something to eat. And before I let you all go, I have one last question for you all. Are you as excited as I am? His antenna wiggled with excitement. This question, as well as the way their captain was acting, seemed to have caught the crew rather off guard. So Akros said, "After all, we are on a mission of such importance that it might very well determine the fate of our entire species, and are about to make first contact with a people that are like no other species in this known galaxy. I mean, imagine what we will find in human space. The food, the people, and the sights. Who would not be excited, right?" His words, slowly causing the antenna of his crew to wiggle the more he spoke, and Akros just revelled in that sight for a moment, because it was the first time he had seen his crew like this, just like it was the first time they had seen him act like this. So he expected he would be able to see them more often once they reached human space and saw all the wonders it held. So, his questions now answered, he said, "Good. Dismissed."